Hi, this is Nick Lalonde, your host of What's Next, making your third act your best act. Today you're going to hear from James Katayama. He's one of the CFOs of the largest Japanese conglomerates. What stuck out to me in my conversation with James is how introspective he is. He started meditating just a few years ago, which made him evaluate why climbing the corporate ladder was so important to him. He explained that many of his goals for so long had been quantitative and ego-driven. Now that he just turned 60, he said he has a different approach, knowing that he has less years ahead of him than behind him. He would like his focus to be on happiness and satisfaction moving forward. Be sure to listen in when James talks about his retirement journey. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with James as much as I did. James, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you, Nick, for having me and listening to my story.
Yeah. James, one of the things that you mentioned prior to us getting together today is that you just turned 60 recently. How does that impact how you think about moving forward in life and in work?
Well, hitting 60 was a major milestone for me, right? You come to the realization that you have fewer years ahead of you than behind you. And then you start realizing, well, how do I want to spend those remaining years, right? And what's going to add value either to yourself or to your family and to society in general. I've been in the accounting field for many years now. I'm currently the CFO, right? And that position has served me well from a financial perspective. It's provided me the lifestyle that I've been seeking for all these many years, right? But then again, you get to the point where you hit a milestone and you start recognizing, well, what do I want to do with the remaining time that I have, right? Do I continue down that same path, doing the same thing that I've done until I hit a milestone where I'm either forced out because I'm too old or I age out, or due to physical limitations where I can't do the job anymore, right? And so that's the phase that basically I'm in right at this point in time. I have two children. They completed high school, they completed college, and they're off into the careers that they're seeking. So I feel that we've met our obligations as parents in that respect. Mortgage is paid off, so it's not like we have this major expense hanging over our heads. But again, it's what am I going to do that I'm going to get the most satisfaction, I guess, in terms of providing me with a means of feeling really good about what I'm doing, right? And that's sufficiently financially viable, at the same time, but not necessarily. You don't have to be at the top of your game, Part of the reason that I currently enjoy the position that I am, and I've been working since I was 13 years old, is there's a little bit of ego involved, right? So in other words, when you start off young, you're at a staff level or whatever, and then gradually over a period of time, you start growing within the hierarchy, right? And then when you hit the CFO level, it's a C-suite, basically occupation, right? So hopefully people are respectful of you, they're looking up to you, they're looking for guidance and things of that nature. So there's certain element of ego that's kind of involved with that, right? And then so that's basically what sustained me all these years, is maintaining that same position level, right? But then you start realizing that maybe that's not the most important thing in the world, right? And you got to start thinking about other types of things, right? Other occupations or other types of services that you can provide that's going to give you maybe more satisfaction, right? In terms of what you feel is going to be contributing towards, I guess, well-being, society, your family, the whole nine yards. So.
Yeah. Wow. Well said there. I'm curious. It sounds like for a long time, right, you were climbing up the ladder and you've had a lot of success moving into that CFO position. Congratulations, and have been in it for a while now. And when you got there, right, it fed maybe this ego is what you're talking about. I mean, being important and having people report to you felt good, but it sounded like maybe you reached a point in your life where you realized, hey, maybe that's not the most important thing. Maybe my satisfaction and happiness is a little bit more important. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's basically correct because obviously if you're the CFO, you're quantitatively driven. You're focused on the numbers, right? You're not necessarily focused on people. I mean, people kind of come into that to a certain point, right? But that's a little bit, it comes across as being a little insensitive, right? And so, when you get older, you start realizing that there's the qualitative aspect of living and other people's lives and things of that nature, right? And so, as I had mentioned before, as I got older, you start going through a phase of self-importance, self-realization, maybe what's driving you a little bit more. And that's why I brought up ego is basically over the past couple of years, I started realizing, oh shoot, a lot of the reasons that I'm being driven is because of my ego to a certain point, right? But
Mm,
again, you're not going to take your ego with you to the grave, right? So, there's other components of life that really matter, right? And identifying what those components are, that's been kind of my thought process going forward, right? So
hmm
as an example, right, about 5 years ago I started meditating, right? One for just to relieve anxiety or stress or what have you, but then the other component of that is more realizing what makes me driven or what drives me to a certain point. And going through the meditation process, basically, it allows me to identify that, well, maybe it's my ego that kind of drives me in certain directions or whatever, right?
mm,
Um, and I go, well, that's very short-sighted, right? It's very egotistical. It's very selfish to a certain point, right? And and that's not who I want to be remembered for, right? To a certain
mm,
point. So you start going through this transition phase and you start realizing, well, if I when I hit 60, well, what do I really want to do? Right? What's going to
hmm
bring me satisfaction? What am I going to feel comfortable with? What am I going to feel good about myself, right? Um, and so those are the things those are the thought processes that I'm currently going through at this point in time. I've been reading a lot of articles about starting your second life, right? Maybe a career change or what have you, right? Um, but it's really hard because you've been doing this for so many years. It's really hard to kind of go off a different path, right? Um, and maybe find a path that maybe you're more destined to pursue as opposed to the path that I'm currently on, right? It's it's
mm,
it's 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 a proven path, right? It's provided me the means and the livelihood that I currently have, right? But again, is it something that I want to continue to death, right? Is it something that I want to be remembered for, going forward, right? As I mentioned before, I've always had a passion for sea and nature and things of that nature. Um, and so, you know, possibly something in that direction would be helpful for me. I
hmm
like working with animals, right? Maybe even volunteer work or something along those lines, right? Um, so those are I mean, it's right now it's a hodgepodge of different ideas and thoughts, right? But again, my first goal is making sure that I've got the financial ability to kind of sustain that lifestyle going forward, right? So I don't have to worry about the kids. I do have to worry about my wife, right? We've got 4 dogs, right? So got to sustain those animals, right? Um,
That's right.
and so those are the thought process that I'm going through at the moment, right? And so when this opportunity popped up, it was, wow, this is kind of interesting, right? And so it kind of addresses, or it's going to help me focus, where do I want to go, you
hmm
know, 2 years out, 3 years out, 4 years out, or what have you. So
Yeah. I want to unpack some of the things that I just heard you mention because you,
Mhm.
you you gave us so much there, and for the listeners that are tuning in, I think that there were so many good nuggets, and I appreciate you being vulnerable. It's not easy for someone to say, "Hey, ego has probably driven me throughout my career." I think that's true for a lot of us high achievers that sometimes our ego through at some point in our career can get in the way. The fact that you're able to detach yourself from that feeling, and really identify that through meditation is powerful. Sounds like that happened for you a few years ago. But one of the things that you mentioned previously as we were talking is you've been working since you were 13 years old. You're
Mhm.
60 today. As you think about this next step, and you talked to me about how you're reading articles about your second life, we call it the third act of life because we think the
Mhm.
first act is about learning, the second act is growing and building, and then the third act is finding new, fresh purpose, self realization, maybe even new identity, right? So for so long, you've been this successful CFO, right? It's provided you a fantastic life in the process, and you will be separating yourself from James, the CFO, to maybe James, the marine biologist, for instance, right? And maybe you're doing this on a
Right.
volunteer basis. On
Mhm.
not to say that marine biologists aren't incredibly successful, but maybe you're doing it more on a volunteer basis, or not necessarily for the notoriety or the leadership role that brings. So is that an emotional journey for you? I mean, as you think about separating yourself from this highly acclaimed position that it took you, a good chunk of your career to get to?
Well, yeah, I think part of it is emotion, right? Because when you're at a younger stage, right? At least from I guess from my generation, and I'm part of the baby boomer generation, right? So your path from after, let's say, high school to career, it's kind of set. There's a certain expectation, right? You graduate college, right? You get married, you have a couple of kids, right? You put your kids through college, you buy a house. So it's a kind of like almost like a set pattern, right? And so that's the path that I've been on since I was 13, right? So my family's from humble beginnings, right? They're basically blue collar, right? So um, I had to start working at 13 to buy my first car, to put myself through college. My parents' advice was, if you really want something, you have to go out and earn it and work hard for it. So that's been my mindset since that point in time. Um, and it's worked, right? It's worked, right? And part of that is ego, right? But part of it's also to improve where you started from, right? And so it you get to a certain point where you hit maybe the pinnacle of your career, right? And and then you start realizing, well, is that all there is, right? Is that enough, right? And then you start being a little bit more retrospective, and part of the drive to go to where you currently are right now, um again, is to improve your lifestyle, but then also your ego kind of sustains it a little bit, right? So once you get that first promotion, you get that additional money, you get that additional bonuses, right? That kind of motivates you, right? For a little bit, but then money only gets you so far, right? Then there's the qualitative component of living, of your life, that kind of contributes to that, right? And so and so I think that, you know with the kids, you know, being self-sustaining, right? They're not dependent on you as much anymore, right? Um, you start reflecting, and you being a little bit more introspective, right? And then so that's when I started doing the meditation, right? One of the reasons was to control your anxiety, right?
Mm,
And your mood or what have you. But doing that quiet time, right, it allows you to be introspective and start thinking, right?
hmm
Um, and so, I've been doing that for many years, right? And then I started thinking about, well, what about the other components of living, right? Not necessarily the quantitative, the monetary, the materialistic components of it, but more the qualitative components of life, right?
hmm
And that's when I started thinking, okay. And then when I hit 60 last year, that's kind of when it kind of came to a head, right? I'm going,
Yeah.
that was the milestone, right, for me, right? Just like when you hit 30, right, then 40, then 50, then 60, right? 60 was kind of the real turning point, right? And again, you start realizing your mortality a little bit more than, let's
Yeah.
say, in your 40s or whatever, right? Because it could be gone, tomorrow for all we know. Well, it could be gone for any one of us for that matter, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then when you hit
Mm-hmm.
60, it becomes a little bit more set in stone at that point in time, and then you start thinking, okay, well, what do I really want to do, going forward? So
Yeah. So I'm super curious, what are some of those qualitative things that you've uncovered as you've been doing your own research, as you've been meditating on it, that you think would improve your quality of life and just overall satisfaction?
I'm still in that discovery phase, right? But a big part of that basically is the opinion of other people, right? Let's say your immediate family, were you a good son? Were you a good father? Were you a good husband? Those types of things, right?
Mm,
Um, Early in your career, you've been so busy focusing on your career that you may not have had the time to really, devote or give yourself to other people, if that makes sense, right?
mm.
So, like I said earlier, in the early days, it was more the quantitative components, right? Um, the material component. So those are all measurable, right? So that's why I'm calling them quantitative, right? But then at a certain point, there's other parts that you can't necessarily measure, going forward. That probably is maybe more valuable, right? Um, but it's important too, right? And so you start
Mm.
thinking about those things and those concepts.
Yeah, you've mentioned mortality a couple times, and maybe that's part of age, right? You said, Nick, I hit
Mhm.
60, it's a big milestone, and I feel like I have less years ahead of me than I do behind me. And so thinking about your tombstone,
Mhm.
what would you want it to say? What would
Oh God. Oh,
I know that's a heavy hitting question, but I think that's important to think of, start with the end in mind, right? What when we're thinking about the next 30 years or this third act of life,
well,
what do you
probably the
want to
same
be
as my
remembered
father.
for?
Something similar to what my father, right? So my father died at an early age, so he died in the 60s, right? And then so his gravestone basically here lies George Katayama, beloved father, grandfather, and then basically husband, right?
Mm,
Um, and to me, that kind of summarizes his life, right? Again, he was a blue collar worker, but he was from Hawaii, very laid back, very friendly kind of guy. He made a lot of friends with his neighbors. Um, he was a veteran, but he wasn't accomplished in his career, right? So, but there was a lot of people at his funeral, right? There was,
mm.
everyone was saddened, by his departure, right? So that kind of though that event um, never escaped me, right? So that's always been kind of plaguing me a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And and so without necessarily going through this uh career situation, like me, his son, right? He was able to leave a mark, right? Nevertheless, right? Just by being who he was, you know.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
so yeah, so it's a little bit of an emotion type situation.
So it sounds like your dad, his tombstone was more about the qualitative, which you've mentioned before, the type of
Mhm.
friend he was, the father, the husband, not so much, here's what he did in his career. And it sounds like you would like to have be remembered for the similar things, right? More qualitative versus, hey, I was a CFO and fairly successful at that and made good money in this role. You want to be remembered more for the type of neighbor you were and father and husband. Is that right?
Well, I mean, a little bit of both, right? So, I feel that, my situation improved since my father,
Hmm.
right? Um, but maybe it's going skewed a little bit, right? Don't get me wrong, I have a great relationship with my family, my kids, and my wife, right? Um, but I do have regrets, right? Earlier on in my life where maybe, I made certain wrong choices or what have you, right? And and I'm trying to right the ship, so to speak, a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, just being a better person, Um, I'm not going to say that the financial component is not important. I think it is important, right?
Hmm.
But it hopefully it allows me to do the qualitative components of my remaining years, right? And maybe focus on those types of situations, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Now, you mentioned your family members and their input and their opinions matters to you greatly as you think
Mhm.
about this next step for you in really that journey. Are there any friends or family members that have retired that you look at and say, "Hey, that was a total success," or they transitioned to this third act of life?
What's really interesting, and this is the reason that this attracted me to this interview, is a lot of my colleagues have retired, right? Either forcefully or basically voluntarily, right? And a lot of them sound like they weren't prepared, right?
Mm,
So I know one high level person works for a large public accounting firm, and they were going through a downsizing. He got laid off, and it wasn't like he wasn't financially situated, for to be laid off. He just he didn't know what to do, right? And so basically, I think for the first 6 months, he just played golf, right? And
mm,
then and then and then he realized, well, golf wasn't the whole thing. So now he's consulting, right? So he's still going through this exploratory phase, right? I know another gentleman works for a large company, right? And he's also going, and he just recently retired, probably within the past 3 months or so, right? But what really surprised me was there's a lack of thought process or planning in terms of, oh, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm not sure yet, until you get into that situation. So I'd rather have a plan, laid out, or an idea of what I plan to do going forward, right?
mm.
And so I don't know if they're happy or not. I think maybe they're a little bit relieved, maybe in the first couple months or whatever. But as time progresses, right? I would assume they would like to have something, some sense of fulfillment, right? Whatever
Hmm.
that may be, right?
Mm.
So, um,
Why do you
yeah.
think
So I
so
talked
many
with
of
these.
these? Oh yeah,
I
go
know
on.
one guy that a lawyer, right? And so he loves it, man. He was a lawyer. He got out of the hustle and bustle. He's traveling all over the world. He's just enjoying it. He's saying, "Well, when are you gonna do it? When are you gonna do it?" Right? And I said, "Well, soon, soon, soon."
And how long has
Right?
he been retired?
Probably 2 years.
2 years.
Two
Awesome. And
years.
and
Yeah.
why do you think his journey's been so much more successful than some of the other people you mentioned?
I think he planned his, right?
Hmm.
Because he's always talking about traveling the world, right? Going places, right? Um, so I think in his mind he had all this plan idea. This is how I'm going to spend my time, right? The other two people I was spoken about, I mean, I think it was unanticipated. I guess their transition into retirement, so they were more or less forced
Mm.
into it, right? And so I think they had to spend a certain amount of time finding themselves, trying to transition into it, and quite frankly, I think they're still going through that part, if that makes sense.
So it sounds like for some of these folks that you said have not had as successful of a journey, the decision was made for them. Maybe they were forced to retire. Whereas this attorney that's out there, he really got to prepare for it and plan for it. Is he
Yeah, exactly.
working in any capacity today? Does he still practice law on a part-time basis, or is he just completely cold turkey done with work?
He's not getting paid for it. I mean, he'll do like referrals, right? For example, if I have a legal issue that pops up at work, I'll give him a call, and then he'll reference me to the specific specialty or attorney that may be able to help me further, right? So he still maintains the contacts.
Mm,
But I think he really wanted to get out of it, right? So I think the fast pace, the hustle and bustle, of working in a law firm kind of got to him.
yeah.
And so this was a long time thing that he was planning out. This is the time I'm going to get out, and basically that's what he's doing, right? So
Yeah.
he's had a long window to plan it out, financially plus in terms of activity wise, right?
Hmm.
The other
So it
two,
sounds,
they were kind of they had a very short window to start thinking about it, right?
yeah, yeah. And then they were spending that time thereafter finding themselves. So playing golf for 6 months and realized, hey, this isn't it. Went back into consulting whereas this attorney said, hey, I'm a little bit burnt out. I'm ready to make a change. And so he's been able to plan his retirement a little bit better. So it sounds like he's traveling at the moment. Is there anything else he's doing in terms of his time that you've
He
seen that?
he is doing some volunteer stuff, right?
Okay.
And so it's again it's not paid, right? And so I guess he fills up his time with that. You can only do so much back-to-back travel. I think he's in Japan right now for as a matter of fact. Um, but then he'll do voluntary work, right? He'll do
Mm,
referrals. He'll help me out, in some cases if I have a specific question, or guide me in the right direction.
mm,
And uh, so I he seems to be living the life, right? So I'm a little
yeah.
bit on the jealous side of it. So
And how old is he?
he is 63, I think.
63. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's super interesting, right? Because I find so many high achievers, some hate it. And similar to maybe this person that figured out, hey, 6 months after work stopped, golf isn't it for him, or maybe you can
Mhm.
only travel so much. And so he went back into consulting. I see that a lot where people go back to work. But the ones who retire and stay retired, they typically know exactly where they're going to get mental stimulation. I find that's one of the big things that high achievers miss most from their work, and then
Mhm.
a sense of community. And so it sounds like he's
Yeah.
still staying in touch and has a great sense of community. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. Right. And so I feel like he had of all the success story, he's probably the most successful.
Mm,
Uh, all the other retirees, again, they really didn't think about it all that much, right? And so I think they were a little bit caught off guard to a certain point, right?
mm,
And so I don't have there's not a whole lot of direct guidance that I could kind of seek, right? Other than, put together a plan myself.
yeah. I think a really so there's two important questions that I would challenge you to think about. The first is when is enough enough? And so for you, you've been working since you're 13, you're 60 today, make a great income. And it sounds like in terms of your children, it sounds like you've satisfied all financial obligations there. The mortgage is paid off. Is that a conversation that you and your wife have talked about? I mean, do you know what it would take to fund your lifestyle to the point where maybe we've hit financial independence where investments and different income streams take over now and we can step away from work?
Well, I think that's the phase that we're in right now, is pulling it all together, right? So, she also had a successful career, right? She took an early retirement out, in her late 50s. Um, and so she's got her own retirement portfolio, right? I've got mine, right? And we have a living trust that we put together. But we haven't really put together a consolidated budget, so to speak, right? Um, and so we've talked about it, but we haven't really put pen to paper, so to speak. So that's kind of the
Hmm.
transition phase that we're going into right now, is maybe putting pen to paper to tangibly see where we're at, right? And whether or not, some type of retirement future is reasonable,
Yeah, I
right?
think that's
Given
so
given our current
important.
lifestyle, right?
Hmm. Yeah, there's a couple observations, just from sitting down with people and
Mhm.
talking to them about when is enough enough that I often find. One is we spend a lot more money than we think. And so oftentimes we know
Oh
our
yeah.
fixed expenses. We know our property taxes and insurance and utilities and mortgage if we have it. But often it's the one-off expenses that we're not thinking about that really add up. that can
Mhm.
increase our budget, 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes even 100% more than what we think we're actually spending.
Mhm.
So I think that's such an important exercise, is to sit down as a couple and really talk through that. But the other thing I would share with you though is in some cases, if high achievers have been disciplined early on throughout life, you may even be closer than you think. I sometimes find high achievers, they work beyond when they have to because they don't actually know when is enough, right? And so sometimes we can get caught up in we have to keep working for more. And so
Mhm.
I think that's such a it just alleviates so many burdens, right? When you can figure out when is enough for us. And it sounds to me like
Certainly.
that attorney that retired and is traveling the world, I bet you if we were to ask him, hey, when did you know when enough was enough? I mean, he probably went through this exercise 5, 10 years prior, and was really able to identify that. So I think that's an incredible question to ask. The second one I would have you think about sounds like just as high achievers, I know this is something, if they haven't asked this question, then they can often struggle transitioning into retirement. But what does work provide you other than money and financial security? So, what does work provide you other than money and financial security? And when you first start answering this question, your first five answers might be very surface level. It's typically like the last five where we start to
Mhm.
get really deep into what work provides us. So I had two folks that I talked with, right? One had a 5 year plan to transition, business owner, transition into retirement, and he was going to be selling his business over this 5 year period. And then the second one was a CEO of a publicly traded company, and he found out he was going to be relieved of his services um, as of October of last year. And it was so interesting because both of them described transitioning out of work is almost feeling like a terminal illness or losing a spouse.
Mhm.
So one person had 5 years to plan for it. The other, it happened to them abruptly. But if they had answered this question first prior to this transition, I think their transition would have been much more successful. So what does work provide you other than money and financial security? And the reason why I think that's important is because oftentimes work provides us so many things that one activity outside of work
Absolutely.
couldn't provide us. So, the big one that I keep hearing that a lot of the high achievers say they can only find really through work is mental stimulation. So that's why a lot
Mhm.
of folks, will retire and then they'll like one of the things I see quite a bit is people retire and then maybe go into consulting where they consult for 10,
Mhm.
15 hours. I just talked to a guy who he teaches at a local college and he says, Nick, I love it because I'm learning just as much as the students are, right? When we bring in guest speakers. Um, so maybe let's walk through that exercise with you though. As you think about what work provides you other than money and financial security, what are five things that come to mind?
I think the socializing component, right? The um, camaraderie, right? Motivation to achieve a certain, common goal. Um, the challenge, whether it's, budget goals or new business goals or what have you. I guess as you pointed out, maybe the mental stimulation, right? I
Have you
think
thought
being
about,
away from the house
yeah.
is also a good component, right? So, one of the things that I fear is I can't stay at the house all the time, right? I think it would be very boring, right? So to your point, there would be a lack of stimulation other than the normal house related uh, uh, environment, so to speak, right? So in the business environment, there's a lot of different alternate stimulations that'll keep you interested, right? It's the fire, so to speak, right? There's the unplanned events that pop up that you have to kind of fix at that point in time. So um, those are the types of things that I would miss, right? I
hmm
will not miss maybe the bureaucracy or the politics and things of that nature.
Yeah.
But I would miss my coworkers, right? And so many of those coworkers I worked with for many years. Um, yeah, I developed a relationship with, their husbands or their family, or I have, knowledge about their children or what have you. So, um, if I were to retire, then the number of contacts that I have outside of the home is kind of uh, minimized.
Mm, mm.
Right?
Yeah, it sounds like if you were to retire, some of the relationships that you've created would diminish very quickly overnight. Sounds like having a place to go, right? To be able to leave the house is really important to you. And so just quitting cold turkey and being at home all day would scare you. And then,
Yeah,
even some of the
that wouldn't be
fires
very
and the problems.
satisfying. I mean, for a while it might be great, but over time, when you're talking about years and years, it would be very, very limiting, right?
Yeah, so you would not want, going back to the tombstone reference, you would not want your tombstone to say James watched TV better than anyone.
I don't even watch TV now, right? I can't imagine watching it. I think maybe I'll watch maybe one Netflix a month or something like that, and it's got to be
Wow.
kind of interesting, right? I'll catch the news or something like that, but it's hard for me just to sit and watch TV. I can't imagine someone doing that, every day, months in, months out, years in, years out, or what have you. So
Yeah.
I'd have to find something to occupy the time.
Well, James, I have one last question for you. It's a
Uh-huh.
question that we ask everyone who comes on the show. And so you've had a great career, right, in really the finance and accounting space. And I'm curious, knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would have done differently in your career?
I think I would have tried to shoot for more of a better balance between work life, right? And I see it more now with my staff, right, where they have young children, right? And particularly the young ladies, I think they have a little bit more difficult trying to balance work and then also uh, be good parents, right? Um, about a year ago, I had one lady that actually broke down because she was a high achiever at work, but at the same time, she had two young kids, right? And she's
Mm,
trying to maintain both, right? And she found out she couldn't maintain both, right? And for me, it was easier for me because I had my wife, right? And so, early on in my years, I didn't maybe appreciate the effort that my wife was doing. Plus, she was maintaining her career at the same time. So, um, you know, if I had time to go back and redo the situation, I think I would have been more sensitive toward that a little bit of imbalance, if that makes sense.
mm, mm. Well, I can tell that you've gained a lot of wisdom, over the past few decades, right? And the meditating, it sounds like, has just been amazing for you, and being able to take a step back. It sounds like it's not just the quantitative that you're thinking about, the numbers and the goals and the work, but it's more of the qualitative and the relationships and happiness and satisfaction that you're thinking about today. And so
Certainly, absolutely.
that work-life balance that you just talked about coincides perfectly with that. Well, James, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. I had so much fun
Well, thank you
getting
for
to
the
chat with
opportunity.
you. And this was a really, really fun conversation. So hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too. Thank you very much, Nick.